President Muhammadu Buhari presented a budget of 16.39 trillion naira to the National Assembly for appropriation. The President of the Senate is worried about the rising budget deficit. The Speaker of the House of Representatives has promised to ensure exhaustive work on the budget. Also on the program, lawmakers share their views about the budget of economic growth and sustainability. You're watching the Hallowed Chambers. I am Jesu Adiri. President Muhammadu Buhari has laid his pending plan for 2022 before a joint session of the National Assembly. He says the priority for his administration in the next fiscal year is defense and internal security of the country. My colleague Joke Adisa put together this report for the Hallowed Chambers.
It's exactly 1 year that President Muhammadu Buhari presented the 2021 budget estimates to the National Assembly. He is here again for the same exercise. In his welcome remarks, the President of the Senate applauds government's effort at adequately funding security agencies, particularly at a time the nation faces rising insecurity. He says the return to a January to December budget cycle has come to stay, but not without due scrutiny of the financial documents.
I must commend the Senate and House Committees on Finance and Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning for working together to improve the level of revenues for this administration. Mr. President, we understand that due to paucity of revenues, the federal government has to resort to borrowing funds from both foreign and domestic sources to provide infrastructure across the country. That is why the National Assembly approved the request for borrowing. The commitment of the federal government in providing infrastructure across the country means that the funds must be raised one way or the other. Notwithstanding, government should explore other sources of funding its projects in order to reduce borrowing.
Without going into details, President Muhammadu Buhari gives an overview of the current budget and reviews the projected figures in the coming year. Statutory transfers stand at 768.28 trillion naira, non-debt recurrent cost at 6.83 trillion naira, and capital expenditure at 5.35 trillion naira. It disagrees with criticisms trailing government's borrowing plans.
We do not have a debt sustainability problem, but a revenue challenge which we are determined to tackle to ensure our debt remain sustainable. Very importantly, we have endeavored to use the loans to finance critical development projects and programs aimed at improving our economic environment and ensuring effective delivery of public services to our people. We focused on A, the completion of major road and rail projects, B, the effective implementation of power sector projects, C, the provision of potable water, D, construction of irrigation infrastructure and dams across the country, and E, critical health projects such as the strengthening of national emergency medical services and the ambulance system, procurement of vaccines, polio eradication, and upgrading primary health care centers across the 6 geopolitical zones. In 2022, government will further strengthen the framework for concessions and public-private partnerships. Capital projects that are good candidates for PPP by their nature will be developed for private sector participation.
Ahead of the launch of the 2021 to 2025 National Development Plan, the President highlights the priority of the 2022 budget.
Total federally contributable revenue is estimated to 12.72 trillion naira in 2022. Total revenue available to fund the 2022 federal budget is estimated at 10.13 trillion naira. This includes grants and aid of 63.38 billion naira, as well as the revenue of 63 government-owned enterprises. Oil revenue is projected at 3.16 trillion naira. Non-oil taxes are estimated at 2.13 trillion naira, and federal government independent revenues are projected to be 1.82 trillion naira. A total expenditure of 16.39 trillion naira is proposed for the federal government in 2022. The proposed expenditure comprises A, statutory transfers of 780 and 68.28 billion naira, B, non-debt recurrent costs of 6.8 trillion naira, and C, personnel costs of 4.1 trillion naira. D, pensions, gratuities, and retirees' benefits of 577 billion naira. E, overheads of 792.39 billion naira, and F, capital expenditure of 5.35 trillion naira.
On his part, Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila tasked ministries, departments, and agencies of government on the importance of accountability and timeliness.
We have continued obligation to ensure that in considering this appropriation bill, we make all deliberate efforts to ensure that we continue to make critical investments in education, healthcare, public infrastructure, and national security.
President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, has complained about the high level of budget deficit. Senator Lawan is calling for stronger collaboration between the legislature and the executive to reduce the deficit and work more towards improving revenue generation.
Your Excellency, generating and collecting revenues have remained major challenges in our quest for development. The recent efforts by the National Assembly as well as the executive to challenge the revenue-generating agencies is a step in the right direction. Equally important is the recent position taken by the legislature and the executive arms of government to insist on zero allocation to MDS that failed to remit their revenues for the 2022 appropriation. This saw an increase in the contribution of MDS by over 400 billion. It is my view that MDS can contribute to the Federation account much more than that. This policy should be expanded and deepened to cover more MDS. Mr. President, the need to enhance revenue generation and collection cannot be overemphasized. The level of budget deficit is high, and both the legislature and the executive should work to reduce this deficit through the availability of more revenues. I must commend the Senate and House Committees on Finance and Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning for working together to improve the level of revenues for this administration. Mr. President, we understand that due to paucity of revenues, the federal government has to resort to borrowing funds from both foreign and domestic sources to provide infrastructure across the country. That is why the National Assembly approved the request for borrowing. The commitment of the federal government in providing infrastructure across the country means that the funds must be raised one way or the other. Notwithstanding, government should explore other sources of funding its projects in order to reduce borrowing. Mr. President, let me congratulate the National Assembly and the Executive for the passage of the Petroleum Industry Bill and assent to enact the Petroleum Industry Act 2021. The 9th National Assembly broke the jinx of the non-passage of the bill over the years, and Your Excellency, you have achieved the feat of assenting to the bill. Let me also commend you for starting to implement the PIA immediately with nominations of qualified Nigerians to serve on the Petroleum Midstream and Downstream Regulatory Authority and Petroleum Upstream Regulatory Commission. Mr. President, the security of lives and property of Nigerians is still a challenge. The National Assembly is ever willing to work with the executive arm of government to continue to work for better security for our citizens. The recent changes in the leadership of the armed forces is a clear testimony of the collaboration between the legislature and the executive to overhaul the security architecture for better outcomes in our fight against the myriads of security challenges. Mr. President, the recent passage of the Supplementary Budget 2021 that appropriated over 800 billion naira to our security agencies is a commendable step in the right direction. We should continue to provide more resources to our security agencies to sustain the gains made so far. In conclusion, Mr. President, I want to assure you that the distinguished senators and honor members of the 9th National Assembly will immediately start work on the 2022 appropriation bill. In doing so, we'll be guided by a sense of duty, responsibility, equity, fairness, justice, and patriotism.
Speaker of the House of Representatives, Femi Gbajabiamila, says the National Assembly would ensure an exhaustive consideration of the 2022 budget that President Muhammadu Buhari presented to the federal legislature on Thursday. The Speaker insists the National Assembly was committed to the timely passage of the appropriation bill as it did in the last 2 years.
Legislators and leaders in government, we have continued obligation to ensure that in considering this appropriation bill, we make all deliberate efforts to ensure that we continue to make critical investments in education, healthcare, public infrastructure, and national security. Through these investments, we can hope to build an economy that provides enough well-paying jobs for our young population so that we can, in our lifetime, end endemic poverty in our country and eradicate the social ills that derive therefrom. Let me express my profound gratitude to the senators and members of the House of Representatives who have, through the budget cycles, shown an unmatched determination to delivering the annual budget on time, in line with our commitment to a January to December budget cycle. I have seen legislators working through the day and night, forgoing all other considerations in a joint effort to deliver a national budget that meets the highest expectations of the Nigerian people. Therefore, I am confident that the National Assembly will give the appropriation bill the prompt consideration it demands. And for the next 2 to 3 months will be for the strictest scrutiny of the budget estimates. However, let me also use this opportunity to say to the heads of ministries, departments, and agencies of the federal government of Nigeria that the determination of the National Assembly to deliver a timely budget will not derogate from our responsibility to ensure exhaustive consideration of the bill. We will demand a thorough accounting for the funds previously appropriated, disbursed, and expended. And we will take steps to hold to account those who fail to provide the records we need to make informed decisions on the appropriation bill. This is the responsibility of the National Assembly, and we will live up to it. Over the past year, the House has passed several important resolutions relating to healthcare access, primary education, rural infrastructure deficits, and national security that require actual funding. Where these restrictions have not been included in the appropriation bill, the House will work with the Senate and the Executive to see that the final version of this appropriation bill includes necessary allocations to implement these resolutions and give full effect to the best wishes of the House. I thank His Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, GCFR, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, the Budget Office, honorable ministers, and all those who contributed to the drafting of this appropriation bill. The National Assembly will build on your efforts. Together, we will deliver an appropriation act that provides real solutions to national problems, unlocks economic potential, secures our country, and brings a future we can all look forward to and be proud of.
President Muhammadu Buhari's budget of economic growth and sustainability means different things to different people. Some people are talking about the growing deficit, others are worried about the dwindling revenue, and some are concerned about the increased spending on defense and internal security. We also got the views of some lawmakers on this budget laid on the floor of the Hallowed chambers.
The 2022 budget estimates as laid by Mr. President, for me to begin with, goes to show consciousness on the part of the leadership of this country that it is not yet Uhuru. There's no pretending about the fact that these are hard times. Ours is an economy that just emerged from recession. And one of the cardinal principles too is that we have to continue to spend our way out of recession. I'm particularly more interested in the capital aspect of the budget. The recurrent aspect of the budget is taking more money. There's no doubt in the fact that you need money to run a government, you need money to sustain the ongoing programs and policies, of the government. You also need money to be able to continue to give government a human face through the various social welfare programs and humanitarian programs that need to be sustained and which also cost a lot of money. But the capital spending is what will ensure continued development of our infrastructure, and maintenance of our infrastructure. Is also what will help money to percolate, down the strata so that different aspects, of our economy can benefit from this and can reduce the level of shock, in the economy. But by and large, I believe that yet again, philosophers have spoken, as it is said, even through this budget, what is left is to change the world. And that's in implementation by ensuring that all the ministry, departments, and agencies of government are able to diligently implement the aspect of the budget that concerns them. And also for us as a National Assembly, as elected representatives of the people, to ensure that we are not failing in our duty of oversight by making sure that funds are used as appropriated, and that we monitor how these things are done. And also it's for the Nigerian people, to continue to also monitor, what is happening in their various states, in their various constituencies, and in the country on a large scale. But there's no doubt in the fact that the budget is towing the right direction.
Budget presentation by Mr. President for me is very encouraging. Most of the key areas that we have been agitating about have been touched. And Mr. President have made a very wonderful presentation. And of course, if you look at the presentation, you will agree with me that areas of insecurity have been the priority in the budget proposal, which for me is key because it's an area that we have been agitating, and we know Nigerians are not happy about what is happening when it comes to issue of insecurity. And of course, Mr. President also talked about the issue of infrastructure development as also a key priority in this very budget. Areas like rail, roads, water supply, the issue like educational support and healthcare are also areas that Mr. President emphasized on as priority in this very budget. For me, they are very key. But most importantly, Mr. President also talked about the support to agricultural development. I believe we need to support our smallholder farmers if we want to improve the level of productivity in Nigeria. All these areas that have been mentioned by Mr. President as priority are areas that are very key. Of course, we are also aware that our economy, just like any other country, have suffered because of the COVID-19 pandemic. That is why we believe the budget must focus on our needs, not our wants. But of course, the key to the success of this budget is our level of implementation. So we will support the executive of the government to ensure that this budget is implemented religiously. That is the key.
Yes, when you borrow, what is bad about borrowing is once you borrow and for consumption, that is one that is bad. But when you borrow and it's for critical projects, just like he said, like this year now, he said the capital project will be funded 100%. 100%. So that is to tell you that the borrowing is not bad. It is, if it is borrowed, they borrowed. If a loan is taken and at the end of the day, they cannot even do any capital project level to 70%, then we can query it. But to me, even America, as rich as they are, they still borrow. Yes, I support this borrowing. As long as it's going to be used for the goods project that benefit the masses.
Well, my thoughts are this. First of all, we know that the budget is an instrument of fiscal policy implementation. And what appeals to me is that Mr. President has actually accepted the fact that there are challenges of funding the budget and challenges of being able to implement the budget. He has said the budget will be funded 100% when appropriated. But my take on it is that, yeah, borrowing is good, but when you borrow to fund capital projects and you fund it effectively and there are no leakages in what you borrow, if that is done properly, then we hope that the reason for borrowing will be okay, because as it is, we don't have enough money to fund the budget outside borrowing. Well, I wouldn't want to accept that as an individual. But I think while we are borrowing, we have to be very careful in borrowing. Like I said, you borrow, you utilize the funds you're borrowing, and you make sure it's implemented effectively.
I agree with Mr. President on the issue of borrowing plan, because the reason is very simple to understand. If you look at the areas where the government wants to borrow, is to support the key and critical sectors of our own country. We cannot develop as a country without really borrowing at this critical time. It's not only Nigeria, every other country in the world are borrowing now because of the pandemic. They have ravaged economies around the world, not only Nigeria. So for me, if you are borrowing money, it must be channeled toward very critical infrastructural development, which for me is what Mr. President have highlighted in the budget today. So there's no problem when it comes to issue of borrowing.
That's our program for you this week. You can watch the program again on TVC News YouTube channel. Also, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share. Do not forget to follow me on my social media platform to get updates on legislative activities and how it affects you. Thank you for watching. My name is TJ Swadoyi. See you next time.